Hello everybody and welcome back to the second episode of my proposed Italian tank tech tree series. Last episode we looked at the tankettes, armoured cars, light tanks and medium tanks. Today we look at the self-propelled guns, assault guns and self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. I'm probably going to do the premiums as a separate episode because there's quite a few vehicles here and we're going to take a while to get through them all. Now the self-propelled guns are probably the main strength of the Italians from the looks of it. They've also got quite a few good self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, but yeah, let's look at them more in depth and get straight into it. Now the first tank destroyer we're looking at is the Semovente L40 DAR 47/32. This was based on the chassis of the L6/40, which only had a 20mm or sometimes 37mm gun. So we talked about before, these guns weren't up to scratch in North Africa against the British tanks. Practically weren't able to penetrate the British tanks at almost point blank range. So they decided to make a tank destroyer out of it. They've added the 47mm gun that was used in the M13 tank. So quite a good gun. Secondary armament was one machine gun. And it could do speeds of up to 26 miles an hour. Oops, yeah, 26.3 miles an hour I've got down in my book. And it had frontal armour of 30mm, so not quite as good as the Fiat L6 40mm of armour, but still reasonably well armoured. And because it hasn't got a turret, it is, it's lower silhouette, so should be harder to hit. Now I've put this in tier 1 because at the end of the day it does only have a 47mm gun. And I think it would do quite well at that tier. It's the same gun as the M13, probably could be lower tier 1, or in tier 1, either low or high. And I think it would be a good addition for the Italian tech tree. Not the greatest of tank destroyers, but I think it would be a good place to start from. Now the next tank we're looking at, the Semovente 75/18, isn't actually listed in any of my books, so I'm somewhat having to rely on internet sources, unfortunately. It was armed with a 75mm howitzer. The 18 is the length of the gun, so you can see it's quite a bit shorter than some of the other guns. It's just kind of like the Panzer IV, I suppose, or Stug, the original Stug, so it sounds a bit like. Now the armour piercing wasn't all that great. At 100 metres, 59mm of penetration, but with heat it could do 120, so I think that's actually better than the Stugs we've got in the game at the moment, at least the early variants. It had frontal armour of 50mm, secondary armament of an 8mm or 6.5mm machine gun, and could do about 20 miles an hour. Built on the chassis of the M13 and later the M14. Seems like a pretty good tank. It's got good, decent armour. Bit on the slow side perhaps, but seems fast enough. I think it would be a good tank. I've put it in early tier 2. It could possibly be high tier 1. Depends how Gaijin decide to go about with it. But I think it would be a very good tank to have in the game, or tank destroyer to have in the game. Now, unfortunately, the next tank destroyer, the Semovente 75/34, was also not mentioned in my books. But from looking at other sources, you can apparently use the same 75mm gun as on the P40. And at 100 metres had 90mm penetration with armour piercing, or 120 with heat, high explosive anti-tank. Speed of 24 miles an hour. Frontal armour of 50mm and secondary armament of the 8mm machine gun. Seems like a decent tank. I've put it in tier 2, just below the P26, because the tank destroyers tend to be a bit more powerful than their contemporary tanks in the same tier. So I've put it high tier 2. It could possibly go low tier 3, although then it might. But there is another tank that's quite similar to it that we'll look at next. And that tank is the Semovente 75/46. This actually had a better gun, 115mm of penetration with armour piercing at 100 metres, or again 120 with high explosive anti-tank. Only a few of these are built, but and I think these are again used quite a lot by the Germans, as with many of the later Italian tanks and tank destroyers. Frontal armour of 15 to 80mm. Had a secondary armament of 8mm machine gun again, and 24 miles an hour, so a bit of an improvement over the 75/34 in armour. about the same in speed, better gun. I've put this at tier 3, low tier 3, could possibly, I can't really see it being too much lower than that. I think it would be a good tank destroyer for the Italians to have. Now, I've actually gone a little bit out of chronological order with the next tank. I actually moved it recently in the last episode, after the last episode, the Semivente 105/25. The reason I've gone out of chronological order is because it's quite a bit worse gun-wise than its predecessors, that chronological-wise. It only has 76mm penetration with armour piercing at 100 metres, or 120 with heat. Well, it's actually got 121, but only 1mm difference. Has 75mm of armour, which is quite a bit better than its predecessors, chronological-wise, but this is a gun that's going to be important. Could also do 22 miles an hour, so seems like an okay tank. I don't like really going out of chronological order, but I really felt I had to with this tank, because it's just not going to work otherwise. But yeah, would be a good tank for the Italians to have in their tank tech tree. Now, the next vehicle is the one I've been looking forward to the most, the Semivente M41M DAR 90/53. This was armed with a 90mm cannon. I believe it was actually an anti-aircraft cannon, so kind of similar to the German 88mm flak guns. As you can see, it's a bit exposed. The crew actually had to stand behind the gun to fire it and load it. My books actually disagree on how much ammo was carried. One says no ammo was carried and it had to be carried in a specially armoured vehicle that accompanied the tank. Another one says that 6 rounds could be carried, but again, mostly in the armoured vehicle. So I don't know how Gaijin's going to deal with that. But basically, it was meant to be a standoff tank, from shooting from a large, long distances. So the lack of crew protection wasn't supposed to be much of a problem. Now, the 90mm gun was very powerful. I'm reading here, from about 1,000 metres, it was supposed to be able to penetrate 101mm of armour, while from 100 metres it could penetrate about 206mm of armour. So this is a very powerful gun, but like I said, you will have to use it as a bit of a standoff vehicle because it's, very exposed. The actual armour on it is 30mm, so quite a bit less than the other tanks. I don't know if it refers to the gun shield or the actual tank itself, or it's 6 to 30mm. So I could refer to maybe the tank being 30mm and the gun shield 6mm. I'm not entirely sure. Had a speed of about, I'm trying to find it, 22 miles an hour on maximum road speed, so decently fast as well. I think I'm looking forward to this tank immensely, or tank destroyer immensely. It's one of my favourite Italian vehicles of the war, and I definitely would be very excited to see it in the game, where it could actually be used really well. Now, I've put it about tier 4, could be tier 3, low tier 3, high tier 3, because it has got the very big gun. It is going to be used for long distance shooting. It could go a little bit lower perhaps, but we'll have to wait and see really how Gaijin decides to implement it. So as we can see, Italy did have some very good tank destroyers. I do think that is probably going to be one of their main strengths in the game, because that's really, their tank destroyers are better than their tanks in most regards. I think they would be a very good addition for the Italian tech tree, and the thing to look out for the most. Now, moving away from tank destroyers, we go to the self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. And the first one we start off with is the 20mm Breda on the SPA Dovunq 35. I apologise for the mispronunciation if I've got it wrong. Now, basically, it is just a 20mm Breda anti-aircraft gun put on a truck. I haven't been able to find much information on the truck, unfortunately, so I don't know the speeds and stuff. Although it's a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, it's not like it's going to need massive speed. It's not going to be well armoured, exactly. The gun itself can fire about 200 to 220 rounds per minute, which seems like an okay amount, I suppose. Maybe a little bit on the slow side compared to the 50 caliber machine guns and stuff the Americans have. It should be able to do quite a decent amount of damage. It could also potentially be used in the anti-armour role, although it probably wouldn't do that well. I think it could do about 36mm penetration at 100 meters. So not particularly a good anti-tank weapon as an anti-tank weapon, but it could be used in that role potentially. I think I've put it at tier 2 because if you put it too low, you're just going to be, you're going to have a bit of a gap between tier 1 and 3. So I've put it tier 2, low tier 2, where it could do some good against the slower flying aircraft, which it should have more chance of hitting, hopefully. Now, after the 20mm Breda, it kind of jumps up quite a bit in calibre on my tech tree. One, because I thought this would be, more unique for the Italian tech tree, because the anti-aircraft guns can provide some sort of anti-tank capability, but also because I don't think Italy particularly had many smaller calibre self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. I don't think they had anything particularly in between that was used as self-propelled anti-aircraft that I know of. Now, it was a bit hard to find information on some of these self-propelled anti-aircraft mounts, mainly because my books don't particularly list many of them, again, and because there is not much English information on the internet or any other sources, so I've having to be trawl through Italian sites. But the first large calibre self-propelled anti-aircraft gun we're looking at is the 102/35. The ones you're seeing in the picture are mounted on SPA 9000, so that's what the mount was called. Not entirely sure. Like I said, not having to Google translate a lot of this. But they were fortunately put on 634N Fiat trucks in World War II, so we should have a more up-to-date mount, or vehicle that it's mounted to. Now, it can only fire about 7 rounds a minute, apparently, but it could penetrate up to 157mm of armour, with armour-piercing rounds from about 100 metres away. So I've put this about tier 2, high tier 2, because I don't want the armour penetration to make it too unfair, but also the low fire rate will be useless in higher tiers with the faster aircraft. High tier 2 is really the limit aircraft speed where it would be able to handle itself, probably. It has an effective ceiling of about 11,700 metres, so it should be able to reach most aircraft, although, because, well, they're flying a lot lower, but unfortunately they are going to be quite fast, which could be a bit of a problem for it, but hopefully we'll be able to deal with those problems. Now, the next anti-aircraft gun is the 76/40, which, from what I understand, was actually a naval weapon, but apparently some were eventually put on trucks. Fiat 634Ns, I believe, again, or maybe some other trucks as well. Now, this has a better fire rate of about 12 to 15 shots a minute. Can reach up to about 6,000 metres. Not sure penetration values, but this should hopefully be a bit better for dealing with faster flying aircraft, which is why I've put it low tier 3. Hopefully we'll have okay armour penetration as well if you want to use it against enemy tanks, where it should hopefully be able to do okay in that role, though, I'm not really sure, like I say, I'm not sure on the penetration values, but hopefully it'll do okay. Now, the next gun, the 90/53, we've actually already looked at. This was the gun that was mounted on the Semovente tank destroyer, so we already know the penetration is, trying to find it, 206mm at 100 metres. Can also reach up to about 12,000 metres, effective ceiling. Fire rate, I think, is about 19 rounds a minute, 19 rounds a minute, so fast firing, we know it will do okay in the anti-tank role. Should hopefully do well in an anti-aircraft role as well. Not sure on information on the trucks, unfortunately. I think it's on a Lancia 3RO heavy truck. I don't know any information on that, unfortunately. But I doubt it's going to be that fast or well armoured, especially with the huge gun on the back. But I think it would be a good addition for the self-propelled anti-aircraft line. Now, I'll probably leave the video about here. In the next episode, we'll look at the self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, and the premium tanks. But, in this episode, hopefully you've got a good outline of the gun tanks and tankettes, armoured cars, light tanks that could be in the Italian tech tree. These aren't necessarily Italy's strongest sides. I mean, the armoured cars are actually quite powerful, in some cases more powerful than some of the tanks. Light tanks are reasonably okay. Medium tanks can suffer a little bit, but I think if they're tiered appropriately, they could do quite well. I think Italy definitely does deserve some form of tank tech tree, and I hope it will be introduced sometime in the future. And hopefully this sort of raises awareness about the Italian tech trees. Don't forget to visit the links I showed at the beginning of the video. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you like these sorts of videos. Leave feedback. I could always do with more feedback. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.